Everybody, welcome to our panel, Cooler in Real Life, making collection-worthy special editions. I'm your moderator, Cameron Hawkins. I am a writer and host. I've written stuff for IGN, I've done Kind of Funny, GameSpot, things like that. And I am here with this lovely panel to talk about cool special editions. And we're going to do our introductions down the line.
Yeah, my name is Kevin. I am a co-founder and business director at Serenity Forge. We develop and publish games, and we're based out of Boulder, Colorado.
Jeff Smith, known as Smitty, co-founder and product designer, and run Special Reserve Games out of Dallas, Texas.
Hi, I'm Stefan Metaxa. I work for Maximum Games. We're based in California, and we are also publishers of physical and digital video games.
Awesome. So yeah, we're here to talk about special editions and specifically physical editions. I myself spend too much money on cool collector's edition. Who else here? Everyone? Yeah, everyone. I hope everyone. Yeah. So we're just gonna talk about we're gonna start talking about how over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen companies like Limited Run, Super Rare, Special Reserve Games, all those big publishers start making cool collector's editions for games and getting that physical preservation of titles and kind of what do you think for the panel? What do you think the reasoning that is that why they're that is starting to become more popular again as we're getting into a more digital future?
Yeah, I guess I can start. For us, Serenity Forge started off as an indie developer, and we still largely are. And so when we started first doing digital publishing, that was kind of a relatively, well, I wouldn't say easy route, but it was something where we saw examples of other digital publishers kind of doing those types of activities, and we decided to do the same, and we found some good initial success. But then as we became more established in digital publishing, we realized that indie games in the retail space weren't really given any kind of the same level of accessibility as AAA games in those spaces. And so we really just wanted to see more of the types of games that we were personally passionate about in those retail stores, and of course in e-commerce as well. And so that's really kind of what got that started. And our CEO Z in particular is within kind of the hardcore physical collectors community himself. So he really was able to kind of pinpoint and identify what types of games that he knew there was a huge audience for were missing in those brick and mortar stores.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and former developer as well. I started with Terminal Reality. Sharing with the panel earlier, we started out making games for Windows 95 and then Windows 98. So been in the game for just a minute. When we started making games, physical games were games. There was no digital download. There was no Steam. Dreamcast hadn't come to market. PlayStation 1 hadn't come to market. And so we always looked at box design, instruction booklets, things like that, just like you would a vinyl record. I mean, it's part of what I call preserving the art of digital games in a physical format, because this is art. It's not just, if it's pixel art, if it's high-end, beautiful art, it's all art. And so the boxes, as they went away, the retailers, I think, were part of the problem. Big box retailers started reducing the amount of shelf space that they wanted to give. They dictated the sizes of boxes back in the day. Walmart had a very specific box. If it wasn't exactly this size, it didn't go on their shelf. And so I think that the retailers wanted to start squeezing more in, and then, like you were discussing about, the indies started getting squeezed right out. And so I think there was a moment in time where physical didn't have any cachet, and it didn't necessarily have value per se. But now with so many different options for consoles and PCs, and so many great games, I find that part of physical that I think got jump-started was people that wanted to not have to depend on the cloud to have their game, service that might go out of business one day, and also doesn't take up a bunch of storage space on your consoles or whatever. So I think it's kind of a combination of collection of art and also, I don't trust the man. That's where I kind of saw it getting restarted a little bit.
Yeah, and we definitely saw that as well. We started about 10 years ago, and we started as a physical publisher, always doing physical games. And over the years, we actually established a digital publishing label because we were like, okay, physical's on the way out. We're not going to be able to run a business just based on physical. But then weirdly, as this kind of physical renaissance happened, our physical business just kept on growing. And so now we have the digital business, but we put a big emphasis still on physical because there's just so much demand. And I think what Smitty was saying is true. The retailers were part of the problem, where they were kind of maybe pushing out the games which weren't like super AAA blockbusters. But now we've seen demand again from retailers for these indie games with really passionate fan bases because they've realized how much people want physical stuff to go with the IPs that they really care about. So there are a lot of indie games that people are just crazy about, but then they can only get a digital download for it. They want to own other stuff. And so we've seen huge demand for these physical products, and retailers are so much more open to the idea of doing these kind of cool, smaller games for mid-size and indies, and getting them back onto shelves, because it's just been demonstrated again and again that people really want this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it also says the power of the fan and the customer truly can set the trajectory for parts of the business that you seem are beyond control, like a Best Buy or a GameStop being interested in it having an indie shelf. Well, that's not coming because there's a bunch of buyers going, how can we spend more money? It's because it's got to be you guys out there screaming for it, asking for it, supporting all the indies, supporting all the direct-to-consumer publishers. That's how this stuff gets done. I think that's how the movements get made.
And it's so funny as well because so many times we'll go to retailers and we'll try to, because we sell to retailers first, right? And then they put it on the shelves. And we're like, this game is going to be huge. Like, there's such a passionate fan base. And they're like, what even is it? Like, no, we don't understand this. We don't want it. And then we go back to them again and again. We're like, look how much it's selling digitally. Like, people really like this game. And then eventually they're like, okay, fine, we'll try run. And then it sells out immediately. Yeah. And they're like, okay, give us more now. And then we give them more. And then they sell out again. That process happens. And then slowly they've warmed up to this idea of maybe not the traditional games that they think are going to be big hits in physical actually could have a lot of potential. So. And
some of them are a slow burn too. I mean, some things you release physically or digitally, and some of them hit and they explode. We released we're involved with a game called Fall Guys. It just came out of nowhere. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and we thought, who's going to dethrone Warzone and Fortnite? Well, all of a sudden Fall Guys did. And you just think about it, it's a crazy game about psychedelic jelly beans running around a maze with no violence, no language, no words, but it's multiplayer. And it became the least likely game, just right time, right place, So once again, that was the community that elevated that. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar marketing program. So when something like that comes to market and the community puts it into the stratosphere, I mean, you can't do that in music anymore. You can't do that in movies anymore, but you can still do that in gaming, So that's what makes all facets of gaming excellent for me,
Awesome. And so, when you do these special editions, there's this, there's always that idea for the collector as to like how much it costs and like specifically like what is included in it and if it meets that value. So like, what is like the process of like deciding the price of something? Is this after you decide everything that's going to go in there, or is it like, okay, we're going to try and fit this amount of items into this amount of value? What is the process for that?
Well, I can just start it off, my Evie, because, a lot of the games we do, I'm a wholly owned subsidiary of Devolver Digital. So Devolver has an amazing library of great digital games. So we will always look at what the MSRP for the digital download is going to be. And then, I do have to value, how much is the reserve box worth? How much, the perception of value for the fan, not what I'm paying for it. And so I found that, we can usually put about anywhere from $8 to $15 on top of the digital cost. And you can usually manufacture stuff for about that range. And then you kind of need to stay consistent, I think, as well. I think if you have a fan base that wants to collect your stuff and one thing is $74, one thing's $13, one thing's $30, you know, you confuse your fan base. So you really have to have a little foresight on the type of physical products you want to make, because it takes months. I mean, you know, 6 to 9 months on a lot of these production cycles. And so you really have to know everything that you want to make and be able to price it out, you know, before you even ever start selling, or you're going to lose your ass, that's for sure. But, you know, that's kind of one of the formulations we look at. We have the advantage of having a digital product that we're, you know, going to do a physical for. And so that's, you know, some of the math that we use. But we also want to keep it very affordable for the customers, because all of us up here that make physical, there's another side of physical that nobody talks about, and it's the dirty thing called shipping. And shipping is beyond our control. And it's, you know, a burden to the customer and to the fan, because in some cases, if we're shipping to the UK, for instance, they may pay $35 US for the game and $35 US for the shipping and duties and taxes. So there's various levels of obstacles. So we try to keep the MSRP in an acceptable range, because we know these people also have to eat a lot of shipping.
And for us, in addition to all of these considerations, we also care a lot about talking with each individual developer behind the games to see how much they care about and how much they expect as far as the profit margin that they're going to get. Because, you know, as publishers, we all have our kind of standard expectation of our profit margin. But for us, you know, we want to make sure that the developers have their own expectations as well, so that we can, to the best of our extent, meet those expectations. Some of them might be very, very community driven, where they're like, you know, we just want to give our fans the literal best value possible, and we literally don't care about, you know, profits that we may, you know, make off of the physical editions. In which case, you know, we can make those kinds of things work. And for some people, they may be like, yeah, we want to do physical, and, you know, we want to kind of create as much value as realistically possible, but we'd still like some profit. So we take those kind of individual cases into consideration whenever we're kind of talking about a new game.
Yeah, I mean, I think value is such a difficult question when you're making these editions, because you want someone to feel like they are getting a really good deal with one of these packages. And that's kind of a fine art in terms of pricing structure. So we kind of have a similar process as well, where we'll speak with the developers, we'll think about what's appropriate maybe for the franchise. Like a good example is Among Us, that we worked with Innisloth to make the collector's editions. And we kind of just had a brainstorming session and thought, okay, what does your community really love about the game? What do we think would be incredibly cool to have in these editions? We even asked the community what they'd like to see in it. And we kind of put together a number of different items that we thought might make up a great collector's edition. And you've kind of got to do a little bit of a Hail Mary sometimes, because these kind of supply chain cycles are so long that you have no idea if you're going to be able to get something at an appropriate price sometimes. And you have to talk with a number of different suppliers and then make sure that it can all come together at the same time and get you know, assembled in the warehouse and then distributed out to the different. So we're working with like distributors all around the world, as well as our own warehouse in California. So it's an incredibly complex logistical process, and you've kind of just got to make educated bets on whether you think you can do it in value, and then try to deliver it. But yeah, we hope that people saw the value, because also Among Us was difficult because it's you know, for free in some places, and then a very cheap game on consoles. So we needed to create a lot of value in the actual kind of merchandise items in the box.
It's interesting that you say that, because as a collector, you know, you see something that is of the appropriate value, you're just like, oh yeah, I definitely want that. But then, like, and we've seen with all your companies, limited run, like, you guys have proven that, like, hey, what we do, whatever niche it covers of the special edition side, it's quality, you know. Mm-hmm. But then you get like the Marvel versus Capcom Infinity Eggs and things like that, and you just like, and so it's just like, it's interesting like how you can, once you prove that you have the quality of the work, you can do more cool things, and, and you, like, you know, you have gotten trust in your consumers that, like, you're going to make something quality that they're going to enjoy. So like when you decide, you know, whatever decide of collector's edition that you do or special edition, do you see a lot of profit from it, or like how does that go into? Because I know you kind of touched upon it a little bit, but like how does that go into the planning?
Yeah, we're rich. I mean, we all Lamborghini, you know, golf carts around here. But no, well, there's one thing that we haven't talked about, you know, is minimums. So there's one thing in the physical game. So you get to switch carts, for instance. In the United States, you have to order a minimum of 5,000 cartridges. And those cartridges aren't cheap. I'll just tell you, the minimum cost is $8, and then they go up. That's for a 2 gig cart. And so that's before it enters a case or anything. And then also with printing, jacket covers or any of the other printed materials, there's also minimums with your printers. And if you've ever done anything in the print game, you know, there's digital printing and then there's offset printing. That's the big old, you know, good Heidelberg machines with plates and stuff. And that's how we prefer to print and do things. But that's a lot of waste, you know, on printing when you're to get up front. So the cost is really high if you run low number of units. So therefore, you've got these minimums internally that you set, Cam, and then you also have minimums with Sony or Nintendo. So, you know, right off the bat, when you're talking about profitability, you have to make sure that you can sell what you make, you know, because not every game sells 5,000 units. It doesn't. Sometimes it's a slow burn. Sometimes you sell 2,300 units in the first week, and then it takes you 6 months to sell the rest of them. You'd never really know. So I would say your profit is, you know, if you don't think you can sell half of your minimum that you have to make, you probably shouldn't make it, you know, because you're going to be upside down for a little bit. And then with developers, most, like our publishing deals, we pay royalties every quarter. So, you know, if we make you 5,000 units at, let's say the end of a quarter, and I have a whole bunch of COGS, but not a bunch of revenue to offset it, all of a sudden your royalty statement looks pretty terrible for this quarter. So you have to take the developer, and if you're a developer, you need to take that into consideration when you're looking at these rev share deals and how you might want to structure them. But that's just, you know, I would say that's just one thing just to throw in that people don't necessarily understand about print is there is minimums and volume is king, you know, as far as scaling what your profitability can be. So, you know, we'd all love to sell 20, 30, 40,000 units of every single physical game we put out, that's for sure. But so I hope that sheds a little bit of light on some of the risks of profitability.
Yeah, it's kind of a very complicated dance, especially working with retail, because you can get really hurt if you manufacture too many units, as Smitty says, and then you've got kind of like wasted inventory that's just sitting in shelves, and then, you know, worse, it kind of like goes back behind the store afterwards. So you've got to be really careful about how many units you actually manufacture, and profit is a strange thing because you know, with retailers specifically as well, you're kind of working on the basis of a portfolio with them. So you get an order from them, but then you have kind of a back and forth about units that don't sell, and then you have a credit system, and all these complex factors go into it, which makes it a little bit opaque sometimes about how much you're actually making on a particular game. So we you know, have really refined the process over the years of trying to base orders on actual demand. So listing units as early as possible is really important. So just like getting online listings of these editions up and then letting people pre-order them. And then you can usually extrapolate from the number of pre-orders how many units are going to be kind of viable to make for sale. And then you have to be really tight on that. And if you do it well, then there is profit to be made. And we also work at volume with some of them because the margins are small, but if you make a lot of them, then the margins kind of like add up if you're doing many units. So that's another way that we you know, try to counteract that lower margin business compared to digital, at least, where it's so much simpler.
Because your margins can be 50-50 sometimes. Your COGS can be really high, you know, so.
Fortunately, going back kind of to the first question, you know, demand for indie games in general over the past couple of years have risen to the point where like it's a lot less. We still have to be, of course, very careful in kind of calculating the minimums, but it's so many more people are now interested in physical editions of indie games, and you know, it's gotten kind of a little bit easier over the years.
It is hard though, because our game is pay and wait. You know, like you give me your money now, it might be 6 months before you get the game. So sometimes you don't even know if you're supporting the right company or the right team until you get that game, and you might have ordered 2 or 3 things, you know. So it is getting a little harder to navigate the waters to necessarily know who to trust, you know. But we have a really great way in the gaming business of self-policing, you know. We do a really great job, I think. So the cream does rise to the top, but yeah, it is kind of a strange game, and it's one of the only businesses I've ever been in where everybody is very happy to give you the money now and wait. Give it to me when it's right, give it to me when it's ready. But there's no other thing I can think of in America or the world where they don't want the thing right now.
And this is actually something that I just kind of thought of because you mentioned specifically Sony and Nintendo. So this is not a question that we were preparing for, but I'm kind of curious as someone who's primarily an Xbox player. What's the situation with like getting physical like copies of Xbox games for like indies and those type of titles that like, you know, are normally digital that you're trying to get a physical? Do you have any insight on that? Nope.
I mean, do you guys? We don't publish Xbox
sorry,
physical.
what do you mean by the question?
Well, because like I feel like we get companies like Limited Run, for example, that like don't do Xbox at all, and then it's only Sony and Nintendo for games that are on Xbox. You know, and so I was just kind of curious if there was any insight on that. As someone who was primarily an Xbox gamer, I just didn't know if there was any sort of like information regarding that y'all were aware of.
All I can say on behalf of Serenity Forge is please be on the lookout.
Oh.
And that's all I can say. That's all I can say.
Good to know. Okay. I'll just move on from that. So, what are some of your guys's, whether it be ones that you have made or just any, like favorite collector's editions, special editions that you have seen or you personally own that you wanted to talk about, mention?
Let's just talk about the favorite things that we've made, right?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, you first.
No, for me, I've always been a huge God of War fan.
Okay.
And so I've also been always just a fan of like just statues in general. So most recently, I'd say the collector's edition of God of War, the new God of War, not the very old one. Yeah, that one I've been personally a huge fan of, just because it has that really cool statue of Kratos and Atreus together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even before the new God of War, I remember back when I was playing God of War 2 for the first time, you know, that wasn't even in a collector's edition, but I remember distinctively that they had a second disc that had like behind the scenes, and that was only like, I don't know, like in middle school or something back then. And that's actually the first time that I realized that like actual human beings made video games for a living. And so that's one thing that just stood out to me as well, for like just having those extra things within physical packages that maybe the developers, you know, especially back then, just kind of threw out there as a bonus, but it's something that, you know, for me personally, like was like huge in terms of getting me into this industry and like making me realize, you know, back when I was even in middle school, that like, oh right, like there's like
There are
people who are actually behind the game. So these days especially, it makes me realize, you know, when I'm thinking about what to put into kind of physical editions of games, that like you never really know what might inspire people.
Yeah, for me, I really enjoyed figurines and things like that. I think my favorite collector's series that I have is Todd McFarlane's Movie Maniac series. We were doing Todd McFarlane's Kiss Psycho Circus, The Nightmare Child. Todd McFarlane created Spawn. If you haven't ever seen him, he just made amazing figurines. And they were multi-point, you know, multi-articulation points and stuff like that, and they weren't your old Star Wars toys. And so they were just fantastic. But I would say, it was related to gaming because of Kid Psycho Circus, The Nightmare Child, but really it was the Movie Maniac series from Todd McFarlane, his figurines that, love to not take out of the box, put them up on my shelf, and I think that was it. Those were the toys I didn't have when I was a kid,
Sorry, but I'm going to plug one of our collector's editions.
Please do so.
Just because it was kind of like one of the first projects that I really that I worked on from start to finish, and that was Among Us. I already mentioned it, but it was just so cool to see it all come together. So from the initial contact with the developers and the consultancy they were working with, and just kind of talking about how excited everyone was to see something physical for Among Us, which is such an amazing game, and just how it became this like cultural zeitgeist. And everyone was talking about it, but the only thing that people could really get their hands on back then were kind of like knockoff plushies that
and socks, right? Socks.
Yeah, exactly.
I love those socks.
There was so much demand for it, but nothing was happening. And so kind of starting that process, and then just coming up with ideas, and then seeing these ideas that we had, just like informally chatting about them, and then actually seeing the box come together, and then holding a physical thing in your hand with all this like merchandise that's just being like created out of someone's mind. It was a really incredible process, and it made it really special. And then to see it like on shelves, and see people enjoying it, and see people like uploading it to social media and stuff, it was really, really cool. And it just made me realize how much of an extra dimension having a physical game can add to the experience of owning a game itself. So like when you have it digitally, you just play it on your TV or whatever, but when you own it physically, it's like something to hold, to cherish. You can put the stickers on your laptop or whatever. We have like a blanket, you can go to bed every night wrapped in the blanket of your favorite game. It's like, so cool.
I want a picture of you wrapped up in your blanket Among Us, and you're like, it's just you. I know, because there's nothing, we're human beings, right? And so I grew up with a blind aunt, and I always, talked about how do you explain to my aunt what's on TV? Well, how in the H would I explain to my aunt what's going on the video screen? She's blind. And so the one thing about the physical versions of these games is it's a tangible connection to the game. And then if you create a tangible connection to this digital game, then you can create an emotional connection through this physical item to this cold hard digital game. And so that's the way I look at it a little bit more, is it is, we're humans, and we do have 5 senses for a reason. And so that's, I look at it as a tangible emotional connection a little bit to the game as well.
Yeah, I've always loved like collector's editions and stuff, but over the past years, I've kind of gotten back more into just buying games physically in general, just because of what you're saying. Like there's like a connection that you have, like just holding it into your hand, and like you can actually touch it. Is something that's different than just hopping on. It's like in your digital library. I agree with that. For me, as someone who spends way too much money on collector's editions, I think Atlas does a great job with their collector's editions. They're relatively cheap, around $90, $100. It comes with almost always with everything in it. I like the Catherine Full Body one was great. It had a little sheep plushie, like something that is connected, physical, that is a part of that game, which is really cool. Like the Joker mask, from Persona 5 Royal was also really great. And then steelbooks. Who doesn't love a good steelbook? Yeah. Most of us have probably a big steelbook collection at home. Last question before we open it up to the audience is, moving forward, what do you hope for your company to be able to do more of in the future and grow and expand as a company with these special editions, these physical editions?
I want to start by getting you to sign up for my newsletter, and because I hear about your collection, I want you in on our audience here. Yeah. What do you think? You just want to go?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. It's just seeing more indie games on the retail space. I mean, you talked a little bit about how back then, the retailers were really trying to kind of squeeze the space, and it's really just getting more trying to get more space, for the games that we care about. I mean, Serenity Forge in particular cares a lot about kind of meaningful narrative-driven games, and so, those are the games where we found out we can really kind of create a lot of really amazing, really interesting ideas for merch and for the goodies that we can pack in, because a lot of them are very character-driven, and as you said, when you have like, even something as basic as character sticker sheets, people can tangibly see, like if you just put the sticker somewhere, that like, oh, right, these are actual characters within the video game, and I recognize that as a character instead of some random blob on the screen.
It can create a conversation between you and a stranger even,
Yeah. So yeah, that's really simply just trying to find more opportunity, trying to find more space, literally, for meaningful indie games.
Yeah, and I think, for Special Reserve, we've done a ton of Devolver games. A lot of the old back catalog stuff. I think going back to Strafe and, Shadow Warrior 2. And by the way, we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of Hotline Miami up in October. 10th, hello.
Awesome.
So, what I think I'd like to see is, and we're actually working on it, we're going to announce a few new partnerships with some third-party indie publishers and some third-party that aren't under the Devolver publishing wing that we're going to do some special reserves for. We just call them reserves. And you're right, I want to see more retailers trust us to vet what is cool, not just their buyers. Let us show you, what's going on in the space that you can't invade, and so we can bring some of this to people that you can go back into a GameStop and ask the manager, hey, what's cool? And the manager's inform. I love those days of like the record store days, the early mom and pop, games where you could go and ask somebody, because so my biggest wish is that any one of my games that we sell turn somebody on to 3 or 4 other games by other developers. So that's my dream all the time. So just more of that. I just want to keep turning on people by buying, Enter the Gungeon, that all of a sudden they find out about Death's Door, and then they support a totally different developer. That's what I want more of.
Yeah, I think mine is, ours at Maximum Games is similar to Kevin. We see, for so long everyone thought, okay, the industry was totally physical, and then digital started to eat everything, and then it was going to become like 100% digital. But what's so cool now, as we've seen, is that they've just become separate things. So digital obviously is doing incredibly well. Physical is also doing incredibly well. Like last year, physical grew as well as digital. The whole games industry was lifted by the pandemic, very fortunately. And it's just going to be really cool to see what opportunities come about because of that. Whenever someone's making a digital version of a game, for some years, the physical was always deprioritized. And I would love developers to think, okay, we're making the digital version of the game, but how can we get excited about the physical side at the same time, simultaneously? Like, what could we do that would make a really special physical edition, even if it's not like a full collector's edition, but just something that really truly differentiates it from buying the digital product, so people have a choice to make of, do I like this enough to want to own something physical, or am I just going to download it digitally? And I think there are going to be so many opportunities from that, and hopefully retail will continue to be on board with that, that they'll be open to those opportunities of having cool editions, even if they're not full collectors, but just like with stickers or keychains or whatever inside a smaller box. So yeah, excited to do more of those.
And following up, just one quick thing. We're doing an experiment. It's actually going over really well. We put out a game called Demon Throttle for Switch, and we announced it from the very beginning. It's physical only. We call it only physical, never digital. And that's true. It's only going to be on a physical Switch cartridge, never on the online, no digital download, no Steam, no nothing.
Really?
It's only available on physical Switch. We did a pre-order. We opened back up the pre-order right now. It's going on at specialreservegames.com, but to celebrate PAX. And so we're going to try a couple more games after this too that are only physical, never digital, and they might be multi-platform, but only in a physical state. And I did meet with a couple retailers about that and have convinced them, isn't this a good idea, right? You want foot traffic? No, they loved it. So a lot of the retailers are thinking this is an incredible idea. Physical only, it encourages you to come into the store, and that they want more of that. But anyway, so we are going to try, we're doing that right now. Demon Throttle, we're going to ship it this summer, and So I
That's so
advise
cool. That's really cool.
do more. Only physical, never digital. Let's
Yeah.
chart our own course here.
That's exciting. That's super exciting. So yeah, we're at the portion of the panel where if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free.
I thought you were getting up to run out.
No, I just grabbed my bag, but it is what it is. So my question to you, and if this was already mentioned just briefly, I'm sorry if it's just repetitive. What goes into putting physical goods in a box? Is that something that you guys decide, like, hey, I want to put this statue in, or is that something that the developer does? So is it like, hey, I want to put the statue in, but the developer wants a plush, or I want to put in like a vinyl soundtrack, but they want to just do a digital soundtrack? Is that more so your decision, developers, 50-50, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I mean, I think it's always a 50-50 development. I always yield to the developer, always when it becomes to aesthetic and art. But when it comes to actual items like a plushie, for instance, just FYI, it takes you a minimum 6 months to produce a plushie. You have a minimum. They're really high cost of goods. And so I think once you show a developer, here's all the great things that you want to do, but all of a sudden, your cost of goods on this thing is $52. You know what I'm saying? And we'd have to sell it for $125. So sometimes that's when you get a reality check, and then you might say, hey, let's make the physical version just what it is, and then maybe we could come up with a plushie or something standalone, or get somebody to license it. But yeah, that's usually where the rubber meets the road, is when you show what the cost of goods are, or the length of time it is. But yeah, I think most of the time, if you just let the developer's vision of the art, drive it, but they need your guidance. I always thought we should bend to the developer no matter what. And, we spend a little bit too much making things sometimes when we realized they needed our guidance to say, hey, I love your idea, but let's just take that one thing out. It'll make extra $10. I know you want it. But trust me, when you get checks in the bank, you'll thank me. So I don't know. There's no formula. It's a guess, but I don't know how. I mean, ours is very. If it feels right, we do it. There's not a mathematical formula. I don't know about you guys.
It's very similar to us, for us, where we kind of opened the door wide open to begin with, just to have a very open discussion where quote unquote, no idea is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. So we hear out the developers first, because we want them to know that we're here to support them, and that we want to kind of make sure that we do hear out all the cool ideas they have, and then we start narrowing down by feasibility, by cost of goods sold, by all those kind of less exciting elements that go into it. But we want to respect every developer. We want to kind of make sure that there's some element of customization in all of the physical releases that we do that is, of course, like I'm sure we all agree that it's unique to that specific game. So yeah, it's very much kind of a back and forth discussion.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure this is an unpopular opinion in the room, but while I love collector editions, I do not like physical copies of games. How do you guys feel about, either in the future or currently, about collector editions that come with like digital code or something like that, or even a digital download? Does that, in your opinion, take away from it? Is that something you see in the future maybe becoming more popular?
So we have tried that before in retail. So it's called Code in Box. Mm-hmm. So where you basically just get the box, and then you open the box and there's just a code. So there's no cartridge or there's no disc. The issue with that is that it's kind of a consumer perception issue, where someone will see a box on the shelf, and quite often it's someone, let's say it's someone buying a gift for their child. They see it on the shelf, they buy it, and then they give it to their child for their birthday, and then the child opens it up and it's just a code inside. And they're like, oh, thanks, and I think maybe it can be a little bit disappointing for people sometimes when they don't get the actual thing. So it has been tried before, and usually there is, just from kind of a consumer feedback standpoint, negative feedback. So it's become kind of less popular, but I'm sure in the future maybe people will figure out better ways of doing it. and it might come back.
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, we've tried it a couple times. We did Serious Sam 4, but PC Collector's Edition. Came with a vinyl record, it came with an art book, came with a figurine, and a code inside of a steelbook, but a movie-sized steelbook, you know, and then a stick of games. Now, in, you know, PC Collector's Editions don't really sell that well. It seems to be console Collector's Edition. I mean, you could put the same, you know, PC and the Switch side by side, and the Switch would outsell the PC 10-1 on the Collector's Edition. But my audience particularly are a little bit more hardcore. They want pristine carts. They want pristine discs that have day one patch, all the DLC, as much as humanly possible on that cart. So when you have that cart, it requires no digital download at all to have a pristine disc. So actually, my answer to you would be, that's not my customer base, but I see the code in the box way, and then, but yeah, it's a perception of value. Yeah, I think is the right answer, what you said. But yeah, so not too much. I mean, we're not going to pursue that very much in my world. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
I still like you.
Hello. I work more in the kind of retro field, and we are looking into doing more collector's editions, etc. So would you be able to speak a little bit to how you curate non-physical items? So you spoke a lot about like plushies and such. How is it you go about putting together a special edition or a collection-worthy collection with more like ephemeral, experiential items?
Just call Kevin to see where his vendors are. How do you guys do that?
I know.
I
That's why I'm
think,
asking.
yeah, it's kind of, you know, it's not so much, it's kind of, you know, it's different every time. And it can be really difficult. You know, what we like to do sometimes if we have access is to ask the games community what they would like to see in a collector's edition. You also know certain things everyone just loves, like everyone loves a steelbook, for example. I'm not sure how easy that would be to do in the retro space, but if you put a steelbook in there, people are going to love it. Plushies, people absolutely love. There are just certain items which are always going to be a hit. And then other ones maybe can be a little bit more risky sometimes, but you know, I think for us we found it easier to go with kind of a little bit more, you know, doing something really special, but within brackets of things that people would expect, rather than going too out there with what we're including in the edition.
I'll give you advice: get as many samples from as many different vendors as you can. And I mean, that's really, I mean, they will send you samples if you ask for them. And I always call it feel the wheel makes the deal. So, you know, you say you make a really good thing, cool, show it to me, put it in my hand, because I want to see it. Because there's that tactile thing for me. So look at what you're good at. You know, if you're really good at, you know, illustrations and stuff, well, maybe you should do more art prints. You know, I mean, you know, see what you're good at, but you'll find one or two vendors that can be your crutch vendor. And so if you get a print vendor that's just solid as a rock and can turn you out jacket covers and instruction booklets, and they can do a good binding. Like, I'll tell you one thing with Switch. You know, we do instruction booklets inside the Switch case. Well, the Switch booklet itself is only so tall to fit in that case. Well, most binding lines, most people in binderies that are just doing staples, saddle stitching, even perfect bounds or whatever, but most binderies are not set up for spines only this long. So they have to do what's called a double pass. So you have to find a bindery that can do two staples that are straight. And, you know, so, I mean, boring stuff, but it's trial and error and trial and error. And the only way you can really know is get a sample. Yeah. So if you think you have some good ideas, great. Maybe they're great ideas. Google it, ask a friend, email Kevin, you know, but see and get a couple of references for vendors, and just call, get someone in sales, ask them for some samples. And I mean, start there. And believe it or not, I have gotten some ideas out of people sending me samples, because they'll say, hey, I know you asked me for these 3 things, but we also have these 4 other lines. Send them to me. And then you see it and you go, aha, man, I could put this with this, and I'm a genius, you know. So sometimes those samples will actually give you a little prize
I
too.
mean,
But
speaking of booklets, it's like even something as simple as like paper thickness. Like
yes,
people really care about high quality paper, and you can't really judge the value of that until you have those samples in your hands and you can like actually feel them
Yep.
out.
Yep. Yep. And then sometimes when you find what you think you like, you've developed a paper that you really love. I make my own paper. So, I needed to make these boxes, and I was tired of trying to find one vendor that would run out of this and one vendor that didn't have that. So I just started making my own paper, and I'll make 100,000 sheets of it at a time and stack it, just because we know we're going to use it. So when you find out what you really like, make a lot of it and keep it, or at least secure that vendor really well. But that'd be my advice, just lots of samples.
Thank you.
Oh, you're good. You're good. My bad.
Yeah.
We can take one more question. Sorry, guys.
You guys should Rochambeau for it, right? Paper, rock, scissors, right?
So when Dark Souls 3 came out, there was the option for that Estus Flask Edition. And the Estus Flask Edition came with a resin model of an Estus flask, and everyone who bought it thought that what they were going to get was something that you could actually put liquid inside. That's not what they received. It's just something made out of resin, shaped like an Estus flask. Similarly, there was a special edition for a game, I don't recall the game, where it was supposed to come with a duffel bag, and what was advertised was...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it was all wrinkled up, and yeah.
Right, exactly. So the question is, what do you think leads to that? Is it just cynical profiteering?
I know that. I know the answer to that story. They had a vendor issue, and they sent them the wrong thing, and then they were stuck with them. That wasn't intentional, that one that you're talking about right there. But anyway, sometimes you have a vendor issue. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, COVID or not. I mean, we try to make as much as our stuff in the United States as we can to avoid multiple things, shipping delays and costs, availability, quality of goods sometimes. But man, a lot of times people just go out of business, or a shipping FedEx truck crashes on the highway and bursts into flames. It happens. And sometimes it's honestly as simple as that. I don't know that there's too many people in our business that would put 9 really great things in a box and then just one piece of shit just to make an extra 15 cents. I don't think it's going to happen because there's too many people that notice and will call it out and never let them forget it. And so it was probably just probably a collusion of bad things that lead to some of that. But trust who you're buying from, man. Don't give anybody your money until you really vet them. That would be my only suggestion. If they put out one game, well, you're taking a 50-50 risk. If they put out 2 or 3, okay, then you got a better chance. So give the new guys a chance, but, keep supporting indies and the people who've been doing it for a little while. We need you, and we appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thanks once again to our amazing panelists.
Yay.
I hope you enjoyed the rest of PAX, and I hope you buy a bunch of physical goodies.
Yay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate y'all.